Love this story. Didn't see this coming. It's funny. We were talking the other day. I was asking a question, actually, one of the questions that started our show, about the fact that the people born in Gen Z, the oldest ones anyway, will be turning some of them 60 this year, right, in 2025. But now we're dealing with something completely different for the youngest of the Gen Z. So I guess we're going back to around 1995, right? If you're born, that makes you a Gen Z. Which makes me think now if you're born in 1995, you'll only be 40 in 2025. Why are you thinking of retiring? But anyway, the question is about Gen X, not Gen Z. This Gen Z story suggests that these kids now, and they're kids, I mean, they're 30 years old, turning 30 years old, are apparently in no rush to leave home, and not because it's necessarily their own fault. Claire Gagne is a Toronto-based writer and editor with Maclean's and wrote this article, and she is on the line. Claire, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let me begin, first of all, and I know we always sort of have to define this, and I got mixed up between Gen Z and Gen X. So Gen Z, born basically from 1995, 1996 to about 2012, right?
That's right.
Okay. And what we're finding now, based on your article, and you talked to a lot of different people in this situation, parents and kids alike, is this really just the unfolding story about, you know what, things have gotten so expensive they can't afford to live on their own anymore?
It really is. I wasn't quite sure what the story was when I went into it. I had heard about people, living with their parents in Toronto until they were 30 and, sort of parents saying, oh, my kid has come back. They went away for a university and now they're home. And I was, sort of thinking what's going on here. And I kind of thought that maybe there was some big societal shift in how parenting has changed young kids, which, obviously there has been, but the actual reason for all the families that I spoke to where the child is still living at home, it's economic. They just simply cannot afford to move out and have a place of their own.
To which I guess a lot of people would say this is not necessarily new, and obviously the pandemic made it worse. But the other thing you note in your story is those who tried to leave and ended up coming back.
Right. And I mean, sometimes they left for, say, university, and then they thought, then that's sort of it. I've left home. Now I'm going to start my own life, and then realize when they get that job, and in many cases, they're very well-paying entry-level jobs for someone who has a university degree. But in reality, when they look at what they could afford in the market for rent versus that home at home, where they could maybe stay there a little bit longer, have less freedom, but save some money, people were choosing that option.
Yeah, and I love the line. It says, for parents involved here, right, they're emotionally and financially supporting their kids for much longer than they expected. I think that's fair to say. But I love the line that says, instead of an empty nest, they now have a roommate who keeps forgetting to empty the dishwasher.
Right.
That's what they become, right? These kids become your roommates for a lot of these parents.
That's right. And I think it's really hard to make that shift as a parent. I myself have a 17-year-old and a few younger children. But, you're always in that parenting mode, trying to encourage them to do things, bring out the best in them, sort of navigating life from above for them, it feels like. And then suddenly, they're adults, but they're still right there in your space. And trying to make that shift from parents. You'll always be a parent, but from parenting day to day to now you're an adult, we live together. What's our new arrangement? What are our new boundaries? How do we live, in a way that we're mutually helping each other out, mutually supporting each other, and having a relatively tension-free, stress-free environment.
Yeah, I will point out, and I found this fascinating as well in the article, you talk about the fact that this is, sort of nothing necessarily new, but how things have evolved. You look back to the 1960s, right? And I would not have thought about this at the time. Education plays a big part of this with respect to how many kids decided to actually go on to education after high school.
It's right. You're right. And I did speak to a very interesting psychologist in the U.S. who has been studying this since the 90s and the early 2000s. And, this idea of a really drawn-out time in your 20s of figuring yourself out and getting some education, then sort of getting into your career, et cetera, that's not new. That's been going on for years. And he actually coined the term emerging adulthood. So sort of saying you're not actually an adult in that time. And I think what's different is that prior to, recent economic realities, it was possible to do all that out of the childhood home you grew up in. So you would move out and you would be kind of taking all those steps towards a full adulthood somewhat independently. And people are now choosing to spend that time in the home with their parents because economically it makes more sense. And it actually is setting them up better for when they do move out because they're finding they're able to save money.
Yeah, and isn't it something, as I said, the idea being, back then in the 60s when fewer people were going to, say, like college, whatever, the good news is we're seeing more and more people going, but because of the way things are now financially, that benefit, I guess, if you will, is not turning into immediate benefit in terms of finding a job, making money, and being able to move into your own place.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely been a shift there. And I mean, I think that everyone's still trying to figure out what the best path forward is in that way.
By the way, and I should point out as well, for every parent that may be finding themselves in this situation, you also talk to some parents who are actually happy to have the kids back.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise. I mean, not a surprise. I'm a parent. I like my kids. But this idea that they weren't necessarily looking forward to an empty nest, enjoyed the company of their kids, which, in many cases they sort of said, I don't think it would have been the same for me. I wouldn't have wanted to stay at home. I didn't have the same relationship with my own parents where I wanted to stick around a little bit longer. But something about the relationship that the parents now, the sort of late Gen X boomer parents seem to be having with their children is in some cases quite lovely. And they're happy to have that person that they've gotten to know quite well to stick around a bit longer.
Yeah, one other thing that just if you could really quickly mention, this idea of loneliness, which we know has become a bit of a global public health concern, that factors in here as well, right?
It does. And I mean, if you think about it, families are smaller, and our communities have in some ways kind of shrunk down to just in some cases you're at home, you have maybe your spouse, you spend a lot of time maybe online, and loneliness is a real thing. And so having the people that are the closest to you, your kids, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Look, it's fascinating. It's a great article, by the way, for people who haven't read it, who maybe find themselves or about to find themselves in the situation. It's worth checking out just to hear the various individual stories of how kids have ended up back at home and how, as you said before, people may think, you graduated with an arts degree, maybe you're going to find a job making $20,000 or $30,000 a year. There are people here making $70,000 and $80,000 a year who are still, depending on where you live in this country, having trouble finding their own place.
That's right.
So that in and of itself, bit of an eye-opener there. Claire, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
It's great. Claire Gagne from Maclean's Magazine. You want to check it out. By the way, just to correct what I said, I meant to say Gen X, not Gen Z. The eldest in Gen X will be turning 60 this year.